am I stoked about this new EVERREADY race board. And yes, I might be just a little bit partial towards this board because it is a sponsored board. But even with that being said, I've still got to share all my thoughts about it with you guys because I am that stoked about it. So let's dive into it. Alright, first things first, let's talk about how this board is constructed. Now I don't have all these details memorized, so all I'm going to do here is simply read off these facts off of Infinity Surf's website. So if you do want to see these facts for yourself, as well as other information on this EVERREADY board, I highly encourage you to check out infinitysurf.com and see this information for yourself. But with that being said, let's dive into these details. So this board is made with their Team Elite carbon model sandwich construction, as well as their lightweight EPS core, a full PVC shell, a full carbon fiber wrap with fiberglass reinforcement, and is also reinforced with high density inserts on all their plugs and boxes. This board is also offered in a variety of widths, with the narrowest being 21 inches wide, then 22.5, 24, and the widest width being offered at 26 inches wide. I personally chose to get the 22.5 inch wide model, as previously to this board I was using the Blackfish dugout, and that board was 23 inches wide. So I figured with the new EVERREADY having a deeper dugout design and increased stability from that design, I'd be okay going down a ½ inch to 22.5 inch wide model. Now, first things first, these two boards are not at all the same board, as a Blackfish dugout has a completely different design and shape in comparison to the new EVERREADY race board. But even with that being said, there's still a lot of people who want to see what design changes have been made to the new EVERREADY board in comparison to the older Blackfish dugout. So with that being said, let's now take a look at the major design differences between these two boards. Alright, so starting off with the nose of each one of these boards, on the EVERREADY we can see it has a much more drawn in, pointed nose to it, versus the Blackfish, which has more of that bulbous nose to it. It's still drawn in, but nowhere near the same point that the EVERREADY has on it. Moving back from there, as the board starts to widen out, we can see on the EVERREADY that it does start to widen out at a much faster rate to the width of the board, versus the Blackfish. It takes much more of a longer, gradual time to come back out to the full width of the paddle board, versus, as I said, in the EVERREADY, it comes out to that width at a much faster rate. Moving back from there, if I can squeeze between these two boards here, working with a tight office space, we have our dugout section. So this EVERREADY board, a major difference between this and the Blackfish, this EVERREADY board is actually a true dugout board. And what I mean by that is it actually has much more depth into it as you sink down to this board and have taller rails. So the rails are almost twice as tall on this EVERREADY in comparison to the Blackfish dugout. So that's a major difference between these two boards, is this EVERREADY is what I would consider more of a true dugout board, versus the Blackfish, which is kind of like halfway there, but not all the way there for a true dugout. Around the same area as well, we still have all the same locations to attach your race handles to. So nothing's really changed there in terms of that side of things. As well as the midsection here, we also have your drainage holes. Now on the EVERREADY, you have 3 locations for the water to drain from. You have 1 on each side of the board, and then 1 right below the center handle here as well. In comparison to Blackfish, we just have 4 drainage holes, each located on the sides of the board. Then as you go back towards the tail end of the paddle board, that's where things start to change quite a bit once again. Obviously both boards still have a nice gradual slope as you come back to the kickback side of things. But once you get back to the tail of the board, you'll start to notice that these tails have a different design and shape. This new EVERREADY board has a much more drawn in tail to it. And so with that being, you can see on the back end here, that back end tail of the board is much more drawn in versus the Blackfish, which still has a little bit wider tail to it. As well as in the Blackfish, things are still kind of squared off on the back side of things, where now in the new EVERREADY, things are a little more rounded and a little bit more smooth. So it's a major difference between the tail of the board when you compare these two boards to each other. So when it comes to the bottom design of these boards, there's really 3 main areas that have changed. The first one being that the Blackfish has the design of a concave center channel to it, where the new EVERREADY now just has a flat bottom design to it when it comes to the center part of the bottom side of the board. The next main area that has really changed between these two boards is the rails. This Blackfish has a very much more squared off rails to it at a sharper point on both sides of it, versus this EVERREADY is much more rounded now on both sides of the rail when it comes to the whole length of this board. Then the last major difference between these two boards has to do with the fin box location. On the Blackfish, this fin box is located fairly close to the tail section of the paddle board, whereas now on this new EVERREADY, this fin box actually been pushed forward more, probably close to a good 6 inches to a foot more forward on this EVERREADY board in comparison to the location where it was on the Blackfish board. So over the past year or so, I've been paddling the Blackfish dugout for almost all of my paddle sessions and all of my races. And now that I'm on this new EVERREADY race board, I have noticed quite a bit of difference in terms of performance and stability. One of the first things I noticed about this new EVERREADY race board is just how stable it is. The first time I tried this board was actually last year in November, where Dave brought a demo board for people to try out at the USA Sup National Championships. Now that board I do believe was the narrowest model at 21 inches wide, and it was a pretty calm, chill day on the water, so not really any bumps or anything like that. So when I got on this board at 21 inches wide, I was super surprised just how stable I felt on it paddling in calm waters. Since that time, I've now been paddling this little bit wider version at 22.5 inches wide in a variety of conditions, and my thoughts about the stability has remained the same but also changed just a little bit. One of the first things I did notice when I started taking this board out in more choppy conditions or in conditions where there's like boat wake or a side chop or anything like that, that this new board does tend to roll quite a bit more in comparison to the older Blackfish board. So it's hard to say because I feel stable still with it being a deeper dugout. So since my center of gravity is lower to the water surface, that does provide me quite a bit of stability, as well as having the higher side rails as a secondary stability point is super nice to have, and I do really enjoy having that. But at the same time, since the rails are more rounded now, that does allow the board to kind of move more side to side, as well as any kind of chop. That chop does tend to push underneath the board easier, but at the same time, you have to learn to control the board with more control and stability with your own body versus just letting the board be stabilize itself in those choppier conditions. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth in terms of why Dave designed the board having more rounded rails in this video, as he does talk more in depth about this design feature of this in our podcast. So if you do want to hear more in depth talk about why these rails are more rounded now, I highly encourage you to check out that podcast. So overall, in terms of stability, yes, I do feel like it's a bump up in terms of stability with having a deeper, more true dugout design. But at the same time, it does take a more skilled rider to learn how to handle this board and control this board, with it being more rounded on the side rails. It does tend to roll more side to side when paddling on the water. The next thing that I noticed when it comes to performance with this board is how this board has a better and increased glide to it. In comparison to the Blackfish dugout board, this board glides so much better on the water surface. It's just like butter, just slipping across that water surface, which I absolutely love, because I'm doing strong powerful strokes and I go for my recovery phase of setting up for my next paddle stroke. That board is still maintaining good speed and gliding right across the water surface as I set up for my next stroke to take in the water. So I really enjoy that feature about this new race board. The next major upgrade to this board in comparison to the Blackfish dugout board that I was using before, that this board punches up wind so much easier, like so much easier. Having that more pointed nose to this board just allows it to slice through that chop as you're paddling upwind, allowing you to maintain your speed better and paddle upwind with less effort. So that feature is so nice to have. As well as when it comes to downwind conditions or side wind conditions, this board handles so well. The way Dave designed the rocker shapes, this new EVERREADY race board, allows it to catch like downwind bumps so much easier. He even says that he can almost just stand in the middle part of his race board on the EVERREADY and just stay in that one center part there and catch waves or catch bumps, and his board is not diving too far forward or stalling too far backwards. So that's a pretty good design if you can move less on your board while catching bumps, allowing you to maintain stability and speed while paddling, versus having to move more on your board to find the right position to catch those bumps. So that's a really nice feature. And then the last major upgrade that I've noticed since using this board has to do with doing pivot turns. When it comes to doing pivot turns on this new board, it does it so well. By having that narrow design to the tail, as well as having less volume, I believe anyways in the tail, don't quote me on that, but I believe it does have less volume in the tail. It does sink much easier in the water when you step back on that tail, as well as having that fin box a little bit more forward. It just allows it to just spin around so easy when doing pivot turns. So all in all, those are my first thoughts and impressions after using this new EVERREADY race board for a few months now. And as you can tell, I'm absolutely stoked about this new race board and I'm loving using it on the water. If you do have more questions about this board, feel free to leave a comment down below or go check out Infinity Surf's website and see all the details about this race board on there. And once again, I want to give a massive shout out and thank you to Infinity Surf for sponsoring me with this new EVERREADY race board to use it, test it out, and share my thoughts about it with you guys. That's it for today's video though, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.